lots of meetings across the board, and we welcome their advice.
Some of these articles are very disturbing. He, obviously has a chance to defend himself here, but some of this stuff is going to be difficult.
Let him have his hearing and listen to him under oath. I mean, let's go through the process here.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol says he will lift an emergency martial law order after he meets with his cabinet.
Hello, I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. With controversies swirling around him, Pete Hegseth returned to Capitol Hill today. President-elect Trump's pick for defense secretary met with Republican senators 2 days in a row. CBS News has learned GOP insiders pushed to remove him as the leader of a veterans group back in 2016 over allegations of financial mismanagement, repeated intoxication, and sexual misconduct. Hegseth's attorney has denied all allegations against his client.
We're going to meet with every senator that wants to meet with us across the board, and we welcome their advice as we go through the advice in council.
Meanwhile, the Trump transition team has entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Justice. That means it can submit names for background checks and security clearances. Nicole Killian and James Laporta are following all of this for us, but we'll start with Nicole on Capitol Hill. Nicole, great to see you. I've been seeing your walk all over Capitol Hill, following Hegseth around, peppering him with so many questions, including about his mother reportedly calling him a, quote, abuser of women. Let's watch.
What is your message to senators while you're here?
I welcome their advice, and it's always great to have an opportunity to talk to them about how they want to make sure our military is strong and ready.
What makes you qualified to be defense secretary, sir?
Go up the stairs, guys. Go up the stairs.
Excuse us.
Can you describe the relationship with your mother?
I love my mother, and I love the men that I serve with in combat.
Oh, Nicole, Hegseth is obviously very selective about what questions he wants to answer from you. What do you make of what you're hearing from him?
Well, again, to your point, I mean, it's his prerogative what questions he's going to answer and what he doesn't. What I can say is that he has been relatively quiet about all of these allegations against him. And obviously, there have been multiple opportunities to ask questions of him about these reports of intoxication, sexual misconduct, financial mismanagement. We have asked him at every turn with respect to his conduct when he was leading to veterans nonprofit groups. And each time he either doesn't say anything, or he says that he is just here to meet with senators. As you mentioned, his attorney, however, has denied these allegations. But it is a noticeable difference because, of course, when he was here on Capitol Hill before the Thanksgiving Day recess, of course, there was also that accusation of sexual assault stemming from a police report in 2017 in Monterey, California, where he was accused of sexually assaulting a woman at a GOP conference. Or a Republican women's conference, I should say. And, when I asked him explicitly about that, he was very clear to say, well, that's been fully investigated and I have been cleared of any wrongdoing. But again, with respect to these newer allegations, he has not said as much. That being said, in terms of talking to a lot of senators this afternoon here on Capitol Hill, many of them do want answers. And they say that they want to know if these allegations are true. They believe that this confirmation process may tease some of that out. I asked Hegseth, what he says to lawmakers who may be concerned, but again, he did not respond to our questions.
Our colleague Ed O'Keefe reports that at least 4 Republican senators would likely withhold support for Hegseth if a vote were held today. We heard from some Republican senators today about his chances of making it through a confirmation. Let's listen.
Some of these articles are very disturbing. He, obviously has a chance to defend himself here, but, some of this stuff is going to be difficult.
I would just urge my Republican colleagues who are very worried. I know a number of them are expressing public concern. It's fine. But I would just urge them before they make up their minds, let him have his hearing and listen to him under oath. I mean, let's go through the process here and give him a shot to answer this and more.
Trump's initial pick for Attorney General Matt Gaetz, now a former congressman, withdrew after he faced similar controversies. Do you think that impacts Hegseth's chances at all? Because perhaps Republicans don't want to sink another one of Trump's picks?
Well, again, I think we'll have to see kind of where the vote count stands. Obviously, if it's 4, that's kind of right on the cusp of potentially jeopardizing his nomination. But again, with Republicans expected to be in the majority next cycle, there is the possibility that, Republicans can afford to lose some votes. And certainly Republican leaders have made that clear. But that being said, it will be an uphill climb, certainly for Hegseth, as I mentioned, because many senators, as I said, that I've talked to have also expressed concerns about these allegations, and it really kind of depends whether or not what Hegseth says about them is enough to satisfy senators' concerns. Some senators have said these allegations have come up in their meetings. Others say that it hasn't been addressed at all. So, it really kind of depends where everybody falls on this. I will say some senators have expressed interest, and Republican senators explicitly have expressed some interest in making sure that these FBI background checks are conducted on nominees. So I think also having that potentially serves as a backstop to help senators kind of either address some of the concerns they have or maybe reaffirm some of their concerns they have to make a more informed decision about their vote.
That's a great point. Thank you so much, Nicole. Appreciate it. Let's bring in now James Laporta. He is a verification producer for our CBS News Confirmed team. James, great to see you. So Hegseth is contending with a range of misconduct allegations connected to his removal as head of a nonprofit in 2016, including financial mismanagement and sexual impropriety. What stands out most to you as you've been reporting?
What stands out most to me is literally where the allegations originate from. These are not, the allegations do not come from Democrats. They don't come from the so-called deep state. The allegations are stemming from lifelong Republicans, lifelong conservatives. These are people who are Trump supporters. And while they support President-elect Donald Trump and his incoming administration and his policies, they do have serious concerns about Mr. Hegseth and his past alleged behavior and how he may govern and how he may be able to run the largest U.S. government agency in the U.S. government.
Can you help us understand what specifically Hegseth is accused of doing?
So there's a range of issues from sexual misconduct, fostering kind of a toxic work environment under his leadership, sexual assault allegations and misconduct while he under his tenure as head of these organizations, and again, financial mismanagement. You could do, the senators that we've been hearing from on Capitol Hill, they want to hear about these allegations and they want them investigated on whether or not they're true. One thing we can look to is setting aside, the allegations of sexual misconduct, setting aside, a toxic work environment. You can look at the financial mismanagement, which we have here at CBS News. He was head of 2 nonprofit veteran organizations, and their tax information is public record. And so you can look at that as a vehicle for how he might run a government agency with a budget that's well over $840 billion.
Well, Hegseth had to step down from one of those veteran organizations that he led. Do you think that matters, especially when it comes to his effort to try to be confirmed as defense secretary?
I think you can't discount it. I think it has to be taken into consideration with the totality of the allegations that he's facing. Right. If you look at, at the time when he stepped down, if you take when, for example, his tax filing from like 2015, 2016, when he was head of Concerned Veterans of America, they were spending more money than they received. In fact, in that year, they raised $15.9 million, but they spent $16.4 million. And with the incoming administration, they have been sort of, beating the drum about financial responsibility and balancing the budget and to fight against fraud, waste, and abuse. And again, his time at these nonprofit veteran organizations is relevant to how he might run the Department of Defense, where, by the way, these are taxpayer dollars.
Well, we look forward to much more of your reporting, James Laporta. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been 2 days since President Biden announced his decision to pardon his son. What the president has said, or more accurately, what he has not said in the wake of the highly controversial move. You're streaming America Decides.
Mr. President, why did you change your mind and pardon your son?
Mr. President, why did you pardon your son?
As you saw there, President Biden has still not answered questions about his decision to pardon his son, Hunter Biden. The controversial pardon was cited by President-elect Trump's attorneys in a motion made public today to dismiss his criminal hush money case. They argue that President Biden's decision was motivated by similar complaints Trump has made about the Department of Justice. Ed O'Keefe joins me now. Ed, great to see you. So obviously, this decision has sucked up a lot of oxygen from the president's historic trip to Angola.
Yeah.
And it's not like he's not hearing the questions, I believe. Are you surprised that he hasn't taken any?
No, because this is what he does. He issues controversial decisions or makes controversial decisions and then manages to keep himself away from cameras and microphones. It's become a pattern over the last year especially. And in this case, I don't think he really cares, frankly, what we want to know about this. He made clear in that statement, I hope the country can appreciate, essentially, that he's a father, but also president, and was able to take advantage of a unique presidential power that exists for him, and decided that amid what's coming next, or at least what Donald Trump says is coming next at the Justice Department and the FBI, that he might as well get his son out from any real trouble. And as for political consequences, he and people around him would probably argue, look, he has served his 4 years. People will think whatever they want. But I remember what he said in December 1972 when his wife was killed and his 2 boys were in the hospital, that he really seriously considered stepping down, having just won that race at the age of 29, saying Delaware can get another senator, but these boys can't get another father.
Yes.
And I think he knows that he's leaving the presidency in 7 weeks. And he'll no longer be president, but he'll still be a father. And he could not live with himself with Hunter behind bars or facing the threat of serving jail time.
And I think the pardon itself is not the issue here, really. I mean, it is, but there's also what he has said to the public.
Yeah.
But on that statement that you mentioned, Trump's team is now using it. And I anticipate that'll just be the first of many times they point to Biden's decision. Are Democrats worried that this is going to give Trump a lot more room to do things like this?
Worried, terrified, pissed off, concerned, realizing they have little to stand on now after spending the last several years arguing that they were the party of responsibility and rule of law that would never do something like this because the president says he won't. Well, he just snatched the rug out from under them, and it's going to make their arguments ring a lot more hollow. And so they've got to come up with a new way of attacking Trump and all the things that he may try to do, both with pardon powers, with enriching himself and his family or his close friends by nominating people in his family to serve in key roles. Because at this point, all the Republicans need to do is turn around and say, yeah, but he said he wouldn't do this, and now he's doing it.
Well, before you run off, I do want to ask you about Angola, because President Biden is there right now. And he, promised that he was going to go to Africa for quite some time. Why is this so important to him to do before he leaves?
Well, he had made the vow in 2022 that he would make the trip in 2023. It got postponed for a variety of reasons. And he was supposed to go in October. There were those 2 hurricanes in the south, so they pushed it to now because he wanted to make this trip. It speaks to the focus he's had for so long on the ongoing struggles between democracies and autocracies, or essentially the United States and China. China is the biggest trading partner for most of the African continent. The project he's highlighted while in Angola is a big rail project that the United States is helping fund to get minerals off the continent to ports so that they can be sent to the United States and elsewhere. It's the kind of work he would have liked to do much more of over these last 4 years if COVID and political acrimony back here at home hadn't been such a big focus, and he would have loved to do, especially in his second term, but he won't. And the real question about this trip is, okay, great, you made it, but to what end? And what happens when Trump takes over? Does this kind of focus continue? Or does it fall by the wayside as the president-elect takes a much firmer approach to China?
Yes, that is a big question, Ed. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, we are following developing situation in South Korea. Their president has lifted martial law he imposed after the parliament defied him by voting to overturn it. It began when President Yoon Suk-yeol made an unannounced address to the nation declaring martial law while accusing his political opposition of sympathizing with North Korea. Following the order, the military announced political gatherings would be suspended. Despite that, enough members of parliament were able to meet and vote to block the martial law decree. Charlie D'Agata joins us now from the Pentagon. Charlie, thank you for making time for us. Can you walk us through how we got to this moment and what has happened since the martial law was ordered?
Weijia, nice to see you again. It has been a tumultuous day. You know, the night ended in South Korea with the South Korean president declaring martial law. It took everybody by surprise. It took South Korea by surprise. Obviously, North Korea took the Pentagon, State Department, White House. Nobody was expecting this. And it was real. That martial law went into effect immediately. And as you said, banning protests, any kind of political dissent, taking control of the media. And it lasted for a fair few hours because, yes, the parliament came in, as many as could, because this is late at night, early in the morning. About 190 of 300-something came in by unanimous decision, reversed that. But apparently under South Korean law, they may reverse it. It's then up to the president to go ahead and accept that reversal. And about 6 hours later, he said, OK, we'll agree to take that order back. So, but for, a tumultuous 6 hours, the country was under martial law order. And this is a major ally, military ally of the United States. There are 28,500 troops there at bases throughout South Korea. So this was something that the Pentagon was closely monitoring. I can tell you, Pentagon officials tell me that the mill-to-mill, as they call it, the South Korean military and the U.S. military were in constant communication throughout. Yes, there's a lot of soldiers that live off base, but they would have had to adhere to that curfew. But as I said, this was late at night. By early morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, that had been reversed. But, a tumultuous time. The North Koreans were looking at it, and this is a major U.S. ally in that region.
Well, the State Department has also expressed their concerns. Let's watch.
We are watching the recent developments in the ROK with grave concern. We are seeking to engage with our Republic of Korea counterparts at every level. Our alliance with the Republic of Korea is ironclad, and we're fully committed to that. And ultimately here, our hope is, and every hope and expectation is, that any political disputes will be resolved peacefully and in accordance with the rule of law.
And Charlie, given the close allyship that you just laid out with South Korea, what role does the United States play when something like this unfolds?
Well, yes, of course, the South Korea is a diplomatic partner, but it is what we would hope to be, what the United States would hope to be, is a stable democracy. But importantly, you have that U.S. military contingent there as well. So I think in terms of what's going to happen to this South Korean president, it was described to me as a Hail Mary. He was facing impeachment. This is probably going to be quickened. Yes, there needs to be a stable political democratic society. That needs to be a trading partner for the United States. But as far as they're concerned, here at the Pentagon, as far as the military is concerned, we've got North Korea. North Korea has acted belligerently in the past few months. They want to keep those channels of communication open. It's also worth noting that there's nothing to indicate that North Korea had changed anything in their posture in order to exploit the situation. As far as the U.S. is concerned and the North Korean military, importantly, the South Korean military is concerned, it's business as usual, and they're going to maintain that sort of stability, whatever the sort of political upheaval happens in South Korea itself.
All right, Charlie D'Agata, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, Jamie Raskin is challenging Jerry Nadler to be the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. Is this race the beginning of a new generation of Democratic leadership? Next, we take you to Capitol Hill. You're streaming America Decides. As Democrats grapple with November's election and how to move forward, a fight for power and for a youth movement, apparently, that's underway on Capitol Hill. Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin is challenging 77-year-old New York Congressman Jerry Nadler to be the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. Georgia Congressman David Scott has two challengers to be the chief Democrat on the Agriculture Committee. The 79-year-old has been absent from Capitol Hill due to health problems. Let's bring in our Scott McFarland, who is there now on Capitol Hill. Scott, there is talk that if Raskin prevails, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez could replace him as ranking member of the Oversight Committee. So are we watching the beginning of the torch being passed on to the next generation?
There's certainly an attempt. It's not a true youth movement. That may not be the goal, but that certainly is a potential consequence here. For Democrats on Capitol Hill, seniority has meant everything. Once you get one of those chairmanships or top positions on a committee, you get to keep it as long as you can. But Democrats are trying to emerge from some form of a political wilderness right now. So there are efforts to kind of break that tradition and oust the senior members of some panels and install newer, younger, potentially better messengers, according to some members of the caucus. Jamie Raskin, you see him here. He's one of them, trying to win the top Democratic post on the powerful House Judiciary Committee, coming off his work on the House January 6 Select Committee and leading oversight issues for Democrats this past Congress. He would be challenging somebody nearly 2 decades older, Jerry Nadler of New York. But that's just part of this youth movement. That's just one of the battles that's shaping up, the one for judiciary. You mentioned the House Agriculture Committee. David Scott of suburban Atlanta has been on that panel for ages. He now has 2 challengers who are much younger. Jim Costa of California, Angie Craig of Minnesota, who just won in a very competitive district in Minnesota. None of them are citing the argument that you need to have youth, but they are saying you need change in these panels, and that's also true in the Natural Resources Committee, where Jared Huffman of California sought to take the position from Raul Grijalva, the long-serving top Democrat on that panel. Huffman is much younger than Grijalva, and Grijalva has already stood down. This is Huffman's committee if he wants to continue in this race. And this may seem like inside baseball, to a degree, it very much is. But all of this sets the table for a broader argument in the Democratic Party. Do they want a broader youth movement? New outside voices to change their fortunes in the 2026 midterms and in 2028. They're going to test that all out, not next year, next week, when they make these decisions.
And Scott, we just watched President Biden test that out as well when he said it was time for change and step down. So we will see what happens with all of these races after that defeat of Kamala Harris. Thank you so much, Scott McFarland. Well, now that we know who President-elect Trump wants to serve in top cabinet roles, how likely are they to get through the confirmation process? Our political panel weighs in next. You're streaming America Decides. During his first term, Donald Trump's relationships with several cabinet members soured. This time around, he has tapped loyalists across the board, some with controversial records. Let's bring in our political panel, former Republican Congressman from Michigan, Fred Upton, and former Democratic Congressman from New York, Mondaire Jones. Great to see you both.
You bet.
Good to see you. Fred, I want to start with you. Republicans have 53 Senate seats. That doesn't guarantee that any of these potential nominees will be confirmed. Do you have any of Trump's selections having an uphill climb as you're tracking?
Well, for sure. Let's face it, the honeymoon is over. However long it was going to be with Gates. And what forced Gates out was the potential to have the ethics report released to show how bad he really was. That still may happen this week, by the way, with a privilege resolution in the House. But for sure, the Secretary of Defense, RFK at HHS, and maybe Patel have the most serious challenges ahead of them. I think it was good news today, at least for the confirmation process, that the FBI background checks are going to start. I think that was going to be demanded anyway, but there would have been a delay had those not started and be completed. But those are the 3 spots on the front frying pan for sure. in terms of where the Democrats are really going to focus their attention.
Well, Fred, in the beginning, Trump aides made very clear that if you're a Republican senator and you're going to vote against any of Trump's picks, you're going to face a primary. But, you know, that faded pretty quickly. We saw Matt Gaetz drop, and now we see at least 4 Republicans who say they could withhold support for Hegseth. So what do you think that says about Trump's threats for these Republican senators?
Well, that's because they didn't know about the allegations in their background. You know, they just saw Hegseth as a Fox TV commentator, a veteran who served admirably. They didn't know about these sexual altercations. They also didn't know that perhaps that he had come out saying that women shouldn't serve in combat. Well, heck, we've had some members of Congress, women that served in combat, some who lost limbs, like the senator from Illinois. So all of a sudden, those are becoming very controversial picks. And if they find anything else in those FBI background checks, they're done. So it's the honeymoon's over. And, you know, if you look at the senators that these cabinet nominees are meeting with, those are the easy votes. They're not meeting with Susan Collins. They're not meeting with Lisa Murkowski. They're meeting with the hardcore MAGA supporters who are going to be with Trump through thick and thin. So there's somebody's going to go. It was more than just Gaetz, but again, Gaetz was a stain on the whole process, and the American public wants to know what the full story is.
Mondaire, we just talked in the previous segment about younger Democratic House members challenging senior members for top committee posts. Do you think that it's time for the torch to be passed to a younger generation? Now, to be clear, these candidates are not saying, you know, vote for someone younger, but they're saying it's time for change.
Yeah, and I noticed in Jamie Raskin's letter to the caucus, he did conclude by thanking Congressman, Chairman, or Ranking Member, rather, Jerry Nadler for his 50 years of service in state and in federal politics. So, look, I think the argument is implicit. In some instances, it's explicit without being over the top. You know, I'm a big believer in rewarding talent and putting the best members forward to do battle, in this case, on the House Judiciary Committee with people like Jim Jordan, who are going to be leading the charge, I think, to undermine, from my perspective, America's institutions and the rule of law. I don't think people should be rewarded just because they're younger, but there is, within the Democratic caucus, a lot of concern about some of these ranking members who are up there in age and who are perceived as not being energetic, to put it gently, in the way that you would want a ranking member to be in the 119th Congress, when the stakes are going to be extraordinarily high and Democrats are going to be chomping at the bit to take back the Congress. And so I think you're going to see people like Jamie Raskin actually get a lot of support. And I say that with great respect for the process and for the ranking member, because I served on the House Judiciary Committee, for example.
And Mondaire, I have to ask you about the president's decision to pardon his son, Hunter. Several congressional Democrats have condemned that decision publicly. I wonder how you think this could impact the party and the credibility, especially since we heard from Biden so many times that he would definitely not do this.
Yeah, look, I think the president was wrong to say that he was never going to do this. I think everyone understands the compulsion that a father would feel towards his only surviving son. And in this case, you've got a combination of factors. One, Hunter Biden would never have been charged with these crimes were he not the president's son in the first place. And number two, you've got now Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, potentially the next FBI director, on the record on multiple occasions identifying Hunter Biden as someone who they would go after. So I think for a variety of reasons, the president had a good justification to do what he did. Where he erred, I think, is when he said that he wasn't going to do it, because he didn't have to make that promise to the American people. And breaking that promise, I think, looks really bad, because it is bad to have broken that promise. I think that the American people, having just elected Donald Trump, a convicted felon, who, in addition to his 34 felony convictions in one of those matters, was facing over 50 other charges that ended up being dismissed after the American people voted to return him to the White House, are not going to be focused on this. They're focused on how to make ends meet. They're focused on a variety of other things that are of great importance to them. The use of the pardon power by a president of the United States, in this case, the Democratic president, especially in the context of all of the other more egregious uses of the pardon power by Donald Trump and other presidents throughout the course of history, is not going to rise to the level of concern. And I disagree with Mr. O'Keefe because I did watch the interview earlier. This does not deprive Democrats of the argument that they are standing up for the rule of law in any way, shape, or form. You've got a man who incited a violent insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th, and who, with nomination after nomination, even over the past several days, is showing a great disdain for the rule of law. So the president's lawful use of his pardon power in this case does not in any way, shape, or form undermine Democrats' argument.
Fred, do you agree with that? And I guess paired with that, what is the argument that Democrats should be focused on right now? I mean, you endorsed Vice President Harris, and I wonder what lessons you think the party can take away after the defeat in November.
Well, nobody likes pardons. The American public doesn't like them, and it took them decades to realize that Jerry Ford probably did the right thing with Nixon. But, you know, going back with Obama, with Mark Rich, you look at what Trump did with Kwame Kilpatrick, former mayor of Detroit, or Rod Blagojevich, former governor of Illinois. And nobody likes these things. When you look at polling, I mean, this is way down the list. I mean, inflation, the border security is much more. But I just want to quickly comment on the committee selection. This really is an inside baseball process. That's for sure. But the interesting thing to note is that Republicans did it 30 years ago. So I was chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee for 6 years, 3 terms, back in 2010 to 2016. If I was still in the Congress today, I would not be chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee because of the seniority system would still be in place. It would be somebody else. I'd still be waiting my turn. So I think, there's more non-chairmen than chairs. And I think the votes are going to be there for Jamie Raskin and others that, frankly, have done pretty well on the media circuit and the background that they have, whether it be the select committee on the impeachment process, all of that. I think the seniority system on the Democratic side is going to go like the Republican did 30 years ago.
All right, Fred Upton and Mondaire Jones, thank you both so much for joining us today. Kash Patel has said he wants to reshape the bureau that President-elect Trump has now picked him to lead. Next, a deeper look at the potential next director of the FBI. You're streaming America Decides. In an article for The Atlantic, President-elect Trump's pick for FBI Director Kash Patel is characterized as the following quote: "His true faith and allegiance belongs not to a nation, but to one man." The piece is aptly titled, "The Man Who Will Do Anything for Trump." The likelihood of his Senate confirmation is still up for debate. The writer of that piece, Elena Calabro, joins us now. Elena, it's great to see you. And that article aged so well because you wrote it at the end of August, and here we are talking about Patel as the potential FBI director. You must have, seen this coming from a mile away.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that I really wanted to be prepared for the type of person who would likely join a second Trump term. So an archetype, maybe more than a specific person. And Kash Patel, it just seemed to me, was perhaps best emblematic than anyone else in Trump's orbit of the sort of people he would be interested in putting in prominent spots and just staffing around him in a second administration.
And you write that even in an administration full of loyalists, Patel was exceptional in his devotion. Of course, Kash Patel impressed Trump very early on when he criticized what Trump calls the Russia hoax. In your reporting, what else did you find when it comes to just how far Patel was willing to go to carry water for Trump?
It's a great question. And like you mentioned, Kash Patel's relationship to Trump and his devotion to him really did begin with the investigation into the Russia investigation that he helped lead as part of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. From there, as he got into the National Security Council, we see him really strengthen that devotion in more tangible ways. Fiona Hill, who was also on the National Security Council, would testify before Congress that she feared that Kash Patel, for example, had opened up a kind of back channel to Donald Trump to try to field documents to him related to Ukraine in the midst of his first impeachment trial. She had no idea what those documents were saying, but I think it was an early sign of just his willingness to sort of subvert protocol procedure to gain even more closeness with the president. And I think another good recent example is that as Kash Patel and Trump and everyone else left the first administration, Trump, of course, brought several classified documents with him back to Mar-a-Lago. And in the question of the classification status, Kash Patel was the one who stepped forth and said that Donald Trump had verbally declassified them and that he had been there to witness. I had several sources and other outlets have reported the same that said that, this was not accurate. But that's just a taste of the kind of things that he's willing to do. I'll note finally that I had a former senior administration official tell me in the course of reporting my story that Donald Trump knows that Kash Patel is the person that he can say to, look, I'm not telling you to break into the DNC, but wouldn't it be great if that could happen?
And in your reporting, what did you find out about why he is so willing to, try to appease Trump? I know in one instance, you write about an event in Houston in which Patel felt, to some extent, betrayed by the Justice Department. So can you talk about perhaps his personal experiences that have led him to not only want to work with Trump so closely, but to be so critical of what he calls the deep state?
That incident that you mentioned in Houston really is foundational to the longstanding grievance he would develop toward the Washington establishment and the justice system. Just spark notes of that were that he was a prosecutor at the time in the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. He had been in Tajikistan to interview witnesses for a terrorism case that he was staffed on. He learned that there had been a surprise hearing scheduled in Houston for another terrorism-related case, and so he has a very short window of time within which to get back to America. And on his trip to Tajikistan, he had only brought slacks and a button-down, nothing formal. And so as he's en route to Texas for this hearing, he reaches out to the U.S. Attorney's Office, asks if they can bring him a tie. And for reasons that remain in dispute, there was no tie when he arrived. And so as he enters the courtroom, the judge is absolutely livid, really dresses him down for not being attired appropriately as an attorney, takes him into chambers. It was a kind of outburst, really disproportionate to the supposed crime of how Kash Patel was dressed. But what was important was not so much the incident itself, but the fact that when the Washington Post later wrote a story about this and reached out to the Department of Justice for comment, they declined to comment on the record, to defend him on the record, even though behind the scenes, his supervisors were entirely supportive of him. They were not in any way frustrated with him. In fact, were just entirely supportive. So he was angry that that sort of support was not expressed publicly through a comment. And I was told that for the next several months, he just could not let this incident go. He would go to his supervisors again and again and say, what are we going to do about this? Are you going to punish the U.S. attorney for not bringing me the tie? And finally, his supervisor said, I don't know what you want me to do. It's a presidentially appointed position. And so that really was kind of the beginning of the end of his trust, I would say, in the justice system, but also his journey with the Justice Department. He moves very shortly after that to go work for Congressman Devin Nunes on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and the rest is history.
Well, it is history, but there's a whole new chapter that is about to be written potentially, and I know that you'll be covering it all. And I'm so sorry to say we have to leave it there, Elena, but thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Texas's strict abortion law is causing some doctors to avoid certain procedures. Why a new report finds that one woman's death could have been prevented. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. According to new reporting from ProPublica, Texas's strict abortion ban is leading to preventable deaths. Last year, a 35-year-old woman died during a miscarriage after suffering major bleeding. Doctors didn't give her a common procedure used in first trimester miscarriages because it also is used to terminate pregnancies. More than a dozen physicians told the publication her death was avoidable. One of the authors of that article, ProPublica reporter Lizzie Presser, joins us now. Lizzie, can you walk us through why your reporting found that Portia Gummezi's death was preventable?
We spoke to more than a dozen doctors, and we had compiled 200 pages of her medical records into a summary for them to review. And what they found was that Portia Gummezi needed a DNC, and she needed one urgently. And instead, the doctor suggested what he called the routine measure for his hospital, saying it was misoprostol, but that put her at greater risk of hemorrhage. A DNC is a very simple procedure. You insert a straw-like tube into the uterus and you can suction out the remaining tissue, and then your uterus can close and stop the bleeding. But that was not what the doctor suggested for Portia Gummezi. And what we are hearing from doctors across Texas is that some physicians are equating DNCs with abortions and hesitating to provide them, even when they're being used for simple miscarriages.
And Lizzie, what is this particular doctor and hospital saying about why they did not administer a DNC for her?
We tried to reach several members of the medical team over and over again and did not hear back from them. We didn't hear back from the hospital either, except to say that they followed all state laws. We are using our reporting from across the state, from sources, doctors and patients who are telling us that they are seeing a pattern in Texas where some of their colleagues are hesitating to provide what could be life-saving care for patients like Portia who need a DNC when they come in with complications of a miscarriage. They're seeing delays and withheld care. And we spoke to other patients as well who were lucky enough to survive, but experienced very similar reactions from doctors that Portia did.
So the Texas state law has an exception to protect the life of the mother. So why can't physicians use that piece of the law to cover patients who are undergoing, such a medical emergency?
It's a really good question. I think what we were hearing from experts across the country when they looked at Portia's case is that when patients like Portia, there's a healthy 35-year-old woman, come into the hospital hemorrhaging, her body is going to compensate for a long time until she crashes. And that's exactly what happened in Portia's case. If you were just to look at her vital signs, she looked relatively stable until 7 hours, actually it was 10 hours after she arrived at the hospital, when she started gasping for air. And her husband called nurses in, and by the time they got there, she didn't have a pulse anymore. So you can see in a case like Portia's just how quickly a patient can crash. And at that point, it is too late to save them.
And I know, Lizzie, after you published this piece, you did hear from other families. How many women have died for a comparable reason to Portia?
Well, we've looked at 3 cases in depth right now in Texas, and all 3 of them suffered miscarriages and delays in appropriate care. All 3 of them arguably may have been saved by a DNC or the second trimester equivalent, a DNE, and all of them faced delays to that care.
And have you expanded your reporting to other states, since so many are now revising their own abortion laws?
We've been looking at this primarily in Georgia and Texas at the moment, just because the data is a little bit easier for us to sort through. But we are continuing to report on this in other states as well, and we'll continue to see what we find.
And we will be following your reporting. Lizzie Presser, thank you so much. Well, that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.